This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two fantastic human beings, Brian Murray.
Hello.
And Nick White.
Hey.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I'm super excited to have you both on the show because I just like talking to you guys, and we're talking about comic books, and that's the best thing that we do every single week as far as I'm concerned. Everything else is downhill until we get back to the top again. We're talking about comics the following week. So let me ask the question I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Brian.
Well, I've been as good as I can. You know, I am sweating like a pimp in church here in Michigan. It is currently 81 degrees in my recording room, which is actually a nice 15-degree drop from outside. So if you hear just like a constant dripping noise from my audio, that would be why. I've been doing that thing where you buy all of the comics that look good and then don't read any of them.
Oh.
I did manage to get one book in. I read The Weatherman, #1. That's with written by Jody LaHoop, with art by Nathan Fox and colors by Dave Stewart.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting concept. It's basically this guy's a weatherman on Mars. Some kind of weird catastrophe wiped out all life on Earth. And at the end of the book, he is accused of causing that catastrophe. There's no idea why. I would like to give a content warning on this book. You do kind of see the graphic death of his dog in this book, which I know was upsetting for me and would probably be upsetting for others. So if that's the kind of thing that would make you not want to read a book, I encourage you to be aware of that. Personally, I like the story enough that I'm going to pretend I never saw that and keep checking it out. But
yeah.
So this is not actually a spin-off to the Nicolas Cage movie?
No, although the main character does have that sort of manic Nick Cage energy to him.
Yes.
Yes. Tell me more. Like National Treasure energy or like Raising Arizona energy?
Like Vampire's Kiss kind of energy.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's a really interesting book. I grabbed this as well, and I was kind of blown away by just like the fast-paced nature of the story. I really, for some reason, I didn't know what to expect. All I knew is there was some sort of catastrophe, and I knew we were on Mars, but like things were super erratic, but in a good way. Like it was, you could still follow it, and it was very, very exciting. Like it was a real page turner. To say like a super cliche.
Yeah, it's and the art is really, really interesting. Mm-hmm. It's got a distinct, what I think is a pretty distinct style, while still being totally like easy to parse. It's not, you're not going to have to strain your brain trying to figure out what's happening in the panels, but it also doesn't have that sort of cookie cutter look that people are afraid of when they buy a new comic from an artist they're not familiar with. Mm-hmm. The colors are really good. Like I said, besides the dog murder, I would heavily recommend this book, at least to check out the first issue.
Definitely. Yeah, you can't go wrong with Dave Stewart on colors.
I feel like we now need something for the zine where it's a pairing of Nicolas Cage movies to comics. Like if you like this Nicolas Cage, like you need to. So I don't know what we would do for like Left Behind, but I'll think about it.
We'll talk off air.
Yeah.
I like that. Zine #2 is definitely going to have that, I think. I'm going to push heavily hard.
Heavily Nicolas Cage themed. Zine #2.
Yeah. Nick, how about you? How have you been? How have comics books been? All that stuff. Comics books.
I mean, as Brian pointed out, oh boy, it is really hot in West Michigan right now. We are on the second ozone action day, where it's like, hey, don't go outside. Don't exert yourself, no long walks, don't mow the lawn. I'm like, I don't need to be told any of this. It's ozone action day every day for Nick White.
Nick White cares about your planet.
24/7. Yeah.
So much so, he won't even leave the house.
I care long, as much as, putting on like a 7-hour Netflix marathon. It's been good. I recently marathoned a couple episodes of a series called 3%, which is on Netflix. It is in Portuguese, and as the saying goes, subs, not dubs, even though dubs are available. But it's kind of cool. It's a little bit of like It's got a little Hunger Games and
It's very Hunger Games.
Ender's Game and all of the other games that involve kids competing with other kids. But there's not enough of that there to bug you. So that's what I've been watching. As for what I've been reading, because that's what this show is about, I guess, or that's what I'm being reminded. I read Grass Kings 15. This is the last issue, written by Matt Kint, drawn by Tyler Jenkins, colored by his wife, Hillary Jenkins. I was really upset when I heard that this book was going to end. It sort of came out of left field. Matt Kint isn't the sort of guy that has things go on forever, so I'm not shocked, but I was still kind of upset. That being said, the mystery of the Thin Air Killer, which is sort of the ongoing plot throughout the whole run of Grass Kings, might not have the sort of crazy twist that one would have expected, but on the flip side, it's also not basically Shyamalan or Deus Ex Machina. It's very grounded, but like I said, if you were expecting some crazy twist or something super shocking, you're not going to get it. And if you've been reading this book all the way up to 15, you know that it's a very, well, not very, but fairly real-life grounded book. So it fits. It's less of a question of who done it and more of a question of how and why that comes into play. But I still really enjoyed it. It does bring a sense of closure to the run, but Matt Kint, of course, isn't beyond leaving one or two lingering questions that he won't completely tie up for the reader. That being said, for those who liked this book, for those who like this creative team as an ensemble, we will be getting Black Badge from Boom in August, which is about Boy Scouts recruited by the government on covert operations. So I read that.
I was very worried that you were going to spoil the end of Grass Kings, and I was going to strangle you through the internet because I have not caught up yet.
I was very careful in writing this up to make sure that I kind of danced around anything that was too revelatory. The other thing I want to briefly mention is I read the Shazam trade paperback. This was written by Jeff Johns, drawn by Gary Frank, colors by Brad Anderson. I was just looking for something to read a few days ago, and of course I've really enjoyed Doomsday Clock, which is the exact same creative team. And so it's always great when you really enjoy a work and you're like, I wonder if these guys have ever worked together before, and it's like, they have. That's interesting. I really liked it. I wanted to read something Shazam-oriented just because I do believe that it could be one of the few DC films that might actually have potential, because I think it's going to be removed enough from all of the other trash. That being said, Frank's drawing style, what's really weird is it reminds me a lot, the shading does, of Andy Clark and Brian Boland, which is weird when you consider that they're all Brits. So, like, is there like some sort of British drawing instruction thing going on? Like, did they all attend the same art school? I don't know, but their shading.
That might be true. That might be true. They might have all attended the same school.
Yeah, their shading
be some kind
is
of
like
shitty
same.
Brit arts style controversy that we're going to have to deal with.
It's weird, but when I thought about it, I was like, this guy's like these two. And then I was like, oh my God, they're all British. I know people were not totally happy about this. This was sort of a supplementary story to the New 52's Justice League, and people felt that the Billy Batson of this was too much of a jerk, that he wasn't really a nice kid, that he was kind of older than he should be and snottier and meaner than expected. But I think Jeff Johns tries to modernize him without making him super edgy, and I think it works. I get why the character is kind of a jerk. I mean, he gets these powers, and the first thing he wants to do is, like, try to get his hands on money by, like, accidentally, quote-unquote, accidentally zapping an ATM and rescuing some lady, and she's like, how can I ever repay you? Like, as a rhetorical question, and he's like, well, $20 would be good, and he's trying to score. Now that he looks like an adult, he's trying to score booze. It's
classic shenanigans.
It's how a kid that, like, has never really been, like, loved or had a caring, family, going on. It's what you would expect. And Johns, of course, can't ignore some of the Shazam, tropes like Mary Marvel or Tawny Tiger or manifesting the Seven Sins. It's fun. It's good. I would definitely recommend it. And for people who say, that it's not a nice version of Billy Batson, I think it is an adequate modernization of someone who's largely known as like a 1940 series, I think. The only other thing I want to briefly mention is based on this book, Jeff Johns does not have a very good perspective on Philadelphia's crime rate. It's like 24/7 crime if you follow this book. It's like he stops like a bus incident, and then like a mugging, and then like a robbery, and then like a carjacking. Like, this is one night out in Philadelphia. It's just non-stop. So, yeah. What have you read, Mike? How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Maybe I didn't say it on the show last week, but I got engaged. So that's the thing that happened in my life. Otherwise, I feel like just like kind of...
We're all very excited for Mike. I know we're not reacting on air, but we've all kind of gotten that out of our system already.
Yeah,
we gushed over instant message for a while.
Yeah, it definitely happened like 2 weeks ago almost, and so I just feel like I didn't say it on the show. I feel like I should say it. But otherwise, things have been pretty good. Now we're just, my life is basically, what are we going to do? When are we going to get married? And it's like, oh my gosh, can everyone just settle down? It literally just happened. We have no other plans. I just got this whole ring sit thing out of my system. But otherwise, it's been very good, like really, really good. I went to an Armageddon themed party last night featuring the movie Armageddon. Somebody
I don't know if I like that
asleep.
more or worse, or more or less than an actual like Armageddon theme.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We were all very aware of what it was, and someone did fall asleep during the movie, so we got to make fun of them because of the song. I don't want to close my eyes. I don't want to fall asleep. Yada yada yada. And there was
that guy did want to miss the thing.
Well, the woman that fell asleep. She did want to miss it. She didn't really have any interest in the movie to begin with, and most of us didn't. We spent most of the time just talking about how hot Ben Affleck was in that movie, because he was supposed to be like this 20-year-old guy, and he's a good-looking dude back in the day, 1998. So. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but I did read some comic books, which I will talk about. I read The Weatherman, like I said, but the book I did want to talk about was Domino number 3. I did read this, and this is Gail Simone and David Baldion. So the idea of this story is that someone has the ability to take away Domino's powers at will whenever they show up, and these people keep showing up and screwing with her. She doesn't know where these people are coming from and how they know where to go to meet her, so she thinks one of her 2 close friends is backstabbing her, and so there's this mystery afoot as to who's actually betraying her. But on the whole, like, Gail Simone is so much fun. Like, her writing is so much fun, and I haven't read a lot of her stuff. I think the only real major run that I read of hers was her Batgirl run during the New 52, which I really, really enjoyed. Like, I loved that book. And so jumping into this, like her jumping into one of the characters that I've had a really fond appreciation for since Uncanny X-Force or X-Force way back in the day, it's been a lot of fun just to see her write this character. And she does such a fantastic job of getting in the head of Domino and making her feel like this regular human being who knows how good and confident she needs to be, but still having just like your everyday average person problems, trying to figure out, I'm this mercenary badass, how am I supposed to have friends and family, when I'm constantly, hurting others, or not necessarily hurting others, but like, taking from these people and doing all this other stuff. When there's constantly a target on my head, how am I supposed to have others that could potentially use against me, but still keeping friends and, having relationships and things. It's been a lot of fun, and I really just love this book. I really look forward to the rest of this run. One other thing I will say, I did read the Magic Order number 1, even though I was so torn on it last week. And that sigh is pretty much all I want to say about it. So, that's about it. Let's move on to comic books that we're excited for this upcoming week. Comic books are released on June 20th, 2018. What are you guys excited for? Let's start with you, Nick.
Well, for me, I think it will surprise nobody that it's a Valiant book, but I think it will surprise people just which Valiant book it is. Because for me, this week, it's Shadowman number 4. For those of you who know me or have heard me talk about it on the show, I don't know if I've talked about it much. Admittedly, I haven't really loved Shadowman. I feel like Andy Diggle is a great get in terms of talent for Valiant, but I don't feel like he's the right person to be paired with this book, especially because, in terms of issues of representation, it maybe would have been nice to see someone else on this book. Like I said, I get the allure of getting a big name. There's definitely something to be said about that too. But yeah, that aside, Diggle definitely went too action heavy out of the gate with a book that, while they're trying to make it entry level and approachable, Shadowman's sort of been a peripheral character now for like 4, maybe even 5 years. Ever since his I think Justin Jordan run ended in like 13 or 14. So people aren't that familiar with him, especially new readers. And so not at least slowing things down, getting into at least some lore, like that would have been great, because honestly, the lore is kind of complicated and really convoluted. And even for me, who's read some Shadowman, I'm still kind of in the dark, to be honest. No pun intended. And that being said, I feel good about number 4. We're getting a new arc called Dead and Gone, and it's a 3-issue run. Each issue is going to have a different artist, which is really cool. And each is going to cover a different era of Shadowman history. So with this first issue of this arc, we're getting Sean Martinsborough, who previously worked with Andy Diggle on Thief of Thieves. I think he drew all of Thief of Thieves.
Yeah.
And I really love his art. His inking is so thick. It's so good. It reminds me a lot of Mark Laming in some ways. And he's going to follow Jack's ancestor, Max Boniface, from 1940s New York. The 2 other issues are going to be Doug Brathwaite, who I think is doing the Civil War ancestor of Jack Boniface. And then we're getting, like, the 3rd issue, I think is going to be like 4,000 BC or something, with Renato Guedes drawing it. So we're going way back for this. It sounds like an interesting premise. It sounds like it's going to be lore heavy. Maybe we're going to actually build some of this up, so those of us who need this supplementary information are going to get it. And the artists that they've put on here, I feel better about than Steven Segovia, who's fine, but again, not one of my favorites.
That sounds like an all-star lineup. Like, for those 3 issues, that's crazy.
Yeah, I feel like you don't see this with a lot of other publishers where they're lining up all these different artists, or you do, but you're doing it because of deadlines and and issues with getting issues out on time, and not like, well, this guy pairs up really well with this, this artistic this artistic take on things is going to work best to be paired with this time era and whatnot. So, yeah, we'll see. Really haven't loved the first 3 issues, so maybe this will change.
Cool. Brian, what about you? What are you excited for this week?
For me this week, I'm looking forward to Shanghai Red number 1, which is Christopher Sabella and
friend of the show, Christopher Sabella.
Clown Motel survivor, Christopher Sabella, with art from Josh Hickson. I know very little about Shanghai Red, other than the premise of basically a young person is quote-unquote shanghaied and sort of sold into slavery on the high seas. And this is the story of them getting their revenge. It's set in 1800s Portland, which I think is really interesting.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a depiction of Portland that wasn't like, Portland's full of hipsters.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it'll be interesting to see that. Unless it's Portland, Maine, in which case I completely misinterpreted that.
Ooh. Well,
I have a feeling that it's Portland,
given that
Washington.
He's from Portland, I feel like it's probably
Oregon.
that Portland. But
yeah, Oregon, not Washington, because I'm a dummy.
Yeah.
The old Pacific Northwesty.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what it comes down to is I'm kind of always willing to give Sabella a shot. I've enjoyed some of his work in the past, and enjoyed him as an individual on Twitter. So,
yeah. And if you want to know a little bit more about that book, I mean, you should go listen to This Is Not an Interview episode with him that Tia did a short while back.
That's definitely how I heard about it. So
yeah.
What about you, Mike? What are you looking forward to?
I am looking forward to, I guess, X-Men Gold number 30. My notes right now.
Did you hear
just
how
say,
this was couched? I guess. Oh boy.
My notes basically say I fucking guess because
Yeah.
this is like the biggest. This is just another fucking hype beast, and as much as I'm looking forward to it, I'm really wondering like what's gonna be the bad thing. You know, like none of these. This isn't like the '60s where, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Fantastic get married, like Sue Storm and Reed Richards get married, and that's the whole issue. Like, everyone shows up, and it's a good, grand old time, smiles all around, like, this is a great ceremony, we should celebrate it. No, this is the X-Men, and there's always a fucking problem, and there's always going to be some sort of drama, and there's always going to be the Purifiers, or something bad's going to happen, and this whole book has been building towards this, like, this very strong hatred of mutants in a way that is almost unsettling because of how like rational they make the enemy, like I guess they're the bad guys seem, and I say the enemy, sorry, they make the bigoted folks in this book seem so rational, and it's kind of worrying in a lot of ways. But I don't know if Mark Guggenheim, who writes this, because this is Mark Guggenheim, David Marquez, and it's been pretty solid. Like, this book has been very heavy hitting with the issues around mutant rights and like the rights for mutants to live in New York City and live in the United States of America. But building up to this wedding, it's been like coupled with this ever looming cloud of something big and bad is going to happen, and of course, it's all going to culminate in this issue. More than likely, it's all going to culminate in this issue. And I'm kind of worried that they're just going to poo-poo on this wedding that really should be a good thing. Like, the X-Men need a good thing to happen. No, and that's just, I don't know. Like, it's unfortunate that like that's not what's going to happen. So from a meta perspective,
the Colossus wedding, Mike?
Yeah, sorry, I got way ahead of myself. This is the wedding between Colossus and Kitty Pryde, something that's like, it's been on the docket for 20 issues or something like that, and we all knew that it was going to happen, and the question is, you know, they've been back and forth wishy-washy, like Kitty Pryde was married to Star-Lord, and then they got divorced, and, you know, Peter has, you know, they've both been seeing other people here and there over the many, many years, but now they kind of came back together after their big recent bout of Colossus had the Phoenix Force, and Kitty was like, "This isn't you," and he was like, "Katya, but I love you." And
well, that was good.
Yeah,
that was good.
I don't know. I really want this to just be a happy issue because the cover looks so beautiful by Phil Noto, and I want this to end well. But if you think about the marriage between Northstar and his husband, everything was great except for on the back end, like Wolverine was a demon and tried to kill everyone.
What?
So.
Yeah, stuff to look forward to for your wedding, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really looking forward to this issue, but I also know like something bad's gonna happen, and I just don't want that to happen to my favorite couple. Well, my second favorite couple.
Just let these children have a nice wedding.
Yeah. So I don't know. I want to read this, but I'm also very scared. I need to go walk around. So we're gonna take a break. For our show this week, we are focusing on kind of a different medium that is comics, but it's a different kind of comics. We're talking about webcomics in specific. And when we say webcomics, we're talking about comic strips, ongoing comics, and the, I guess, pretty new to the United States in the last couple years, Webtoons. So I want to go through kind of all of the, an example of each of those. Brian has been reading webcomics for a while, so could you talk a little bit about your experience? I'll talk about mine, and then we'll get to Nick as well.
Sure. I hopped onto the webcomic train. I think my introduction was probably Penny Arcade. Back in 03 or 04. That's 2003 or 2004 for those listening in the far future.
Yeah.
From there, I just kind of branched out. You know, I would see ads for other webcomics on a webcomic page, check those out. People would recommend them. A lot of my classmates were kind of getting into it at the same time as me. So
and this is like
pass around recommendations.
This is like comics that you read strictly on like a website, right?
Yeah. Yep. Stuff usually anywhere from 3 to 9 or 12 panels per update. updating anywhere from once a week, 3 times a week. Some of them update daily. Really just depends on the strip.
And you've been reading stuff like, I mean, I don't know if there's been any comics that you've been reading consistently since then, but you have been reading webcomics since, like, would you say 2004 or so?
Yeah,
that's wild.
I've been reading the webcomic Questionable Content since my junior year of high school, I think.
Oh wow!
So that's kind of been like the one through line.
Interesting. See, yeah, so I don't think I really got into webcomics until like mid-college, and I honestly think it was like you and maybe a couple of other people who I knew like before I even got into actual, or I mean, I guess I was reading comic books, but I wasn't like hardcore into comics. Well, that's not even true either. I think I was reading comics and then someone showed me webcomics and I was like, wait, all of this is free to read on the internet? And I like didn't understand it. So like maybe like 2007, 2008 for me is when I really started to like read any webcomics. And I remember the hardest thing for me was just keeping track of all the comics that I wanted to read, because I know that there were some that I was trying to read every time they updated, you know, like XKCD, which everybody in the universe at this point I think has seen, and if you haven't, go to xkcd.com. You've probably seen one of these comics somewhere, and that's like the longest running one that I think I've been reading regularly enough to say like since 2008 I've probably been reading that comic. But otherwise, like, it's been really on and off for me, but I've been aware of different things, you know, like I'll see a webcomic, I'll start on it and then totally forget about it, because not that it didn't resonate, but I just forget, like you lose that tab or you forget to bookmark it and so on and so forth. But I mean, that's mostly been me. But Nick, what about you? What's your experience in reading webcomics?
Well, I mean, there's been sort of a smattering of things here and there, but it's never been anything that's stuck. Like Brian, I did read Penny Arcade here and there, being really big, especially back then when I had more free time, being really into video games in high school and in college meant that I was operating in a certain sphere of the internet where Penny Arcade was getting reposted and pasted frequently. So you were just seeing a lot of that, because that's Penny Arcade was really about gaming. And so I was seeing some of that. It wasn't anything that I was like, oh, I need to read this every month. It was sort of maybe something where I would see someone paste a strip, and then I would go to the Penny Arcade website, and naturally I would read a few more strips from there and chuckle at a few things, and on the side also maybe wonder if they were stoking some controversies that maybe didn't need to be. Anyone who knows Penny Arcade a little bit knows that they have gotten themselves in trouble more than a handful of times, but we're not going to talk about that. So there was that, and beyond that, you know, people would post a couple strips here and there of this or that. I think once or twice I ran across JLA in the past. People were posting that. And I read a little bit, but there was never anything that I was like, oh man, I need to stay current with this or anything like that. And I mean, it, like you were mentioning, it really makes me wonder, and I'm sure they have certain solutions now, but it's like, how do these people effectively deliver their content to people, and how do these people who are consuming it know when to go check it out? How do you keep people from not just falling off the train? So,
I mean, that's a whole big question. I'd love to. I mean, we've talked to a bunch of webcomic folks, you know, like at Emerald City Comic Con, and I would love to have one of them on to actually ask, like, how do you drive people back to your content every month?
Well, I just noticed my WebToons app today. It just reminded me that, like, one of the books that I've been reading has a new chapter. It just pushed a notification to my phone, and that's
right.
The first time I've seen that. But I guess that works. So, but yeah, overall,
I have kind of an obsessive sorting in my bookmarks. So I have a webcomics folder, and then I have a daily folder, and then basically every update schedule that a comic has, I have a folder for. So there's the daily folder, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday folder, because that's a pretty common release schedule. And then for each of the once a week things, I have like a Monday folder and a Friday folder.
Gotcha. So I think the other part of this, Nick, you mentioned it a little bit, is I think what sparked this original conversation topic was I had started using this, and I don't know if it was me, but I want to say from my perspective, I started using this WEBTOON app by the company Line. They're like a Chinese company that really pushes, they're trying to push like a whole social media platform through their app called Line, but one of their child apps is called WEBTOON, and WEBTOON offers a place for people to publish their comic, like these vertically scrolling comic books, or I guess comics, like, I don't know, I say comic book, but they're called webtoons. These vertical scrolling webtoons that are like narrative stories, or they're strips, or they can be pretty much whatever you want, with the caveat of you're not really you only make money based on the number of people that view your stuff. So they just have this never-ending pool of money that comes from, I think, all of the properties that they own and their investments and stuff, and through the, like, some very minor product placement. Like, I don't want to try to give the whole history of Webtoons because I'm probably going to get it wrong, but you know, the incentive is to drive people to the WEBTOON app or to the WEBTOON website, get people to read your comic, and based on the number of impressions and views and likes, but I think it's more about just like impressions and views, you get paid a certain ratio of money based on those numbers. And it's really interesting because it seems to be very, 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 very mobile focused, right? You've got these vertical scrolling things, and it works really, really well on your phone. Funny enough, I do know one piece of a little factoid from the history of these things. They were originally created just for the web, like to read on your desktop browser. But as the mobile phone kind of became a big thing, it blew up in terms of use because people could read these very, very easily. You only need one hand. You can kind of tap and then flick with your finger to move through the comic, and it's great. And so people really, really dig that. At least in China and Korea, I know where they're really, this whole WEBTOON thing is very, very popular. And there's a bunch of other companies like Tapas and like 2 or 3 that I don't know the name of, but I know the logos of, strangely enough. But yeah, like, so this whole thing started there because I started using this, I think, and I was talking to Kate Scotchless and pointed her, I was like, hey, this is really cool, maybe you should try it. And she got really into it, and we were like, let's get Nick into this because we know he's going to hate it. So, you know, the question is, like, you know, Brian, you're a huge webcomic reader. I've kind of been on and off, and I've been using more of this WEBTOON stuff. Nick, you're brand new. I kind of want to know what your thoughts are of, you know, we've been trying to get you to read WEBTOONs and webcomics for a couple weeks now in preparation for this episode. What's your initial feelings like about how this all works outside of the whole, how do you drive people back to your comic? Because I think that's a whole other question. Right,
sure. Well, I mean, initially I hated it. Now I still hate it. No.
Sorry. Yes.
I hate it less, I guess you could say.
Okay.
I think one of the first things that comes to mind, especially with Webtoons, when I'm thinking about it, is that the story creation, I mean, I feel like this is how it has to be done. Like, these stories are being created with the idea and intent that they're going to be this single panel scrolling action, right? It's not that these are, for example, someone taking Penny Arcade and converting it into a webtoon. You know what I mean? Like, this is their native format, right? And
well, for some of them, because there are, okay, I guess there's no conversion. Anyways, continue your thought. I'll address that in a second.
And so what really got me thinking as I started reading some of these at first was, what are the advantages and what are the limitations of presenting something with like a single panel format, right? Because arguably there are less options in terms of how you can convey movement or how you can convey the visual presentation of certain aspects. And so that came to mind, and that seemed kind of limiting for me. But then to play devil's advocate, I said, well, when you think about it, if you think about guided view in whatever format of whatever app of whatever service we're talking about, when you think about guided view, aren't you really having the same sort of panel by panel experience? And to which I would say, yes, that's kind of true. But it's also adapted as a format, and also depending upon how you have your guided view set up in place, you either have motion between panels that can act as sort of a subtle guiding force, or if you're like me, you have full page turned on either at the beginning or the end of the page, so you at least have that perspective. And so with Webtoons, you don't have any of that, which I found kind of limiting. I felt like sometimes it didn't allow for as much variety, but I also feel on the flip side that obviously being able, like you said, to have something where it's intuitive, you don't need both hands to operate it, you don't need to be constantly like, pinching your fingers to zoom in or zoom out for the most part.
Right.
I like that. It's easy, and I think I started with Webtoons like a week or two ago, and by the time that I was starting to pick up and read certain webcomics, especially some of these webcomics I was trying to read on my phone, it was fucking driving me insane. And I was like, I can't fucking pinch in and zoom out on every goddamn panel. This is so stupid.
Why can't I just scroll and have the comic happen?
I wish this was Webtoons. And then I was like, oh man, you're gonna regret saying that.
We fucking got him.
Boy, I wish this was Webtoons. So yeah, I would say Webtoons in its own right is kind of its own separate medium with different rules and restrictions, which is interesting. And I even found some Webtoons, and I don't know if this is common of most or a few or none other than the one I read, but I was reading this one called it was called Room of Swords, and it actually had animation in it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, some of them will have animated GIFs. Some of them will have music queued up to go along with a given strip.
Oh, interesting.
So that's one thing that I really like about the idea of webcomics and Webtoon, or Webtoons in general, is that like they for a while it was just like, how do I make a comic book and post it online, or how do I make my comic strip and just give it to people or broadcast it out so people can read it. And it was just like static images. But I think what we've seen over the past couple years is we've seen people take that and try to add to it in a way that a comic book can't, or really can't, right? Like animated GIFs in comic or webcomics is not something new it's new in the last couple of years, but it's something that's like become more and more prevalent where you actually see a little bit of animation. One webcomic that I really like that does that is this book called Check Please. If you haven't read it, it's the most adorable little story about hockey in Connecticut that you could ever read, and I love it to death. It's one of my favorites that I love going back to and reading. But the creator of that book, they do a really good job of adding little bits of extra interaction that you can only get by reading it on the web, and that you can't get in a print edition. And the book does get printed, and it sells very well. But to get the full experience, I think you really need to read it on like a desktop or a tablet machine that can, process those GIFs and little interactivity bits and pieces, kind of like SMBC Comics. Zach Weiner, I believe is his name. He has those little like hover images and extra panels that he does that you really can only ever get by interacting with it on the web. I think that's really cool. And like Webtoon takes it a whole step further where you can get even deeper animations and you can get music and stuff like that actually goes with the pacing as you read it, because they've built in all that functionality that works really, really cool. Or really, really well.
Yeah, no, it was interesting to see that, and it was kind of hilarious to scroll down to the comments section and just see people that were like, oh, GIFs aren't loading or GIFs are lagging or whatever. So it was like, you've got these cool technical elements, but clearly maybe at some points for certain people they weren't quite working out, which is also interesting. But I mean, to be fair, all of it worked for me. But yeah, so I read some Webtoons. I read some webcomics that were well suited for mobile devices, a few, interestingly enough, and then I read some that were definitely like no different than trying to read a normal web page on your phone.
Yeah, it's the desktop site, but on your phone.
Yeah,
which was the case with JL8. So
right.
What is JL8? I think that's something that our audience would probably get a kick out of.
Sure. So JL8 is short for Justice League 8. It is drawn, written, everything, to my knowledge, all done by Yale Stewart. and I think it has been a comic since 2012, 2011.
Something like that, yeah.
I know it's got like 200 something entries right now. I like went through like 150 of them in like a blur. And if you're, it's a very simple but very clean DC sort of comic about DC characters that are all sort of in, gosh, is it like kindergarten or first grade perhaps? And it's really fun because if you're a DC fan, they slowly inject more and more and more of the expanded DC universe. So at the beginning, it's largely just Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Power Girl, Martian Manhunter, Green Lantern, The Flash, and I think that's it. But then they slowly introduce other, you've got the older kids, which are a bunch of bullies, which is like Lex Luthor, Captain Cold, Bizarro, I think Cheetah as well. And then like they just slowly inject all these other characters. Like at one point they go on a camping trip that is being hosted by Hal Jordan's like Boy Scout troop, and of course all of the other troops are like the Green Lantern Corps, so you have all the little Green Lanterns together, and that's kind of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and for anyone who knows at least a little bit about DC, the way he nails all of the characters is just perfect. Like John's love for Oreos, you know, that's part of this. He goes to Wonder Woman's birthday party and he's not interested in the cake at all, but he just gets addicted to Oreos. Yeah. And, you know, Bruce gets put in timeout, but he likes that because it's like prime brooding time for him. So he actually likes timeout, you know. Neil Gaiman has it's Gaiman, isn't it? I think it's Gaiman. I'm going to hear about that from Kate if I don't correct that. He has a cameo in this. It's just a really fun comic.
The art on it is really cute, too. It's kind of... It reminds me a lot of kind of the old Calvin and Hobbes strips as far as the way it's drawn.
Totally. Like, The Flash looks like Calvin. It literally looks like Calvin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, Yale Stewart, I know, has been in, like... For a while, he started the book, and he like got like a cease and desist from DC, and through something that happened, because it used to be called something else. I want to say it was like Little Justice League or Lil League or something like that, and he had to change the name to JL8 because there was some copyright thing, but DC gave him like the sign-off to continue doing his book, or continue doing this webcomic. In exchange, he ended up doing like a 4-book series for DC, like a young adult version of all these, like the Justice League. But it was like them as adults, not as children, so he could finish this book. It was really cool to see like he's actually got the sign off from DC to do this. And like that's like such a great strip because it ties into like this webcomic format, but it's also about like your classic superheroes, and it totally works. Like I think Nick, to your point, he absolutely nails all of the characters really, really well.
Oh, completely. Like the weird thing about it for me though is that it reads like a newspaper strip, like in terms of how it's set up and whatnot. Like it's formatted like a single row strip, but it's not episodic at all. Like literally every strip completely picks up where the last one dropped off. Like it's right there, like that exact second where the last strip finishes, then the next one begins. And so while it is in a format that looks like it's an episodic format, it's completely serialized.
Yeah, and I think
which is weird.
Maybe Brian, you can speak to this more. I think that's becoming more and more of a common thing among a lot of webcomic artists or creators, you know, where they're telling serialized stories through this either strip format or even full page format. I know there's a couple books that I read or a couple series that I read, like Not Drunk Enough or Check Please, like I mentioned before, that do this. But do you have other examples of that kind of stuff that I think you said that you've been reading a book since you started? Like reading webcomics? Yeah,
that's questionable content. It starts off as just kind of like an indie rock themed slice of life story. And then the creator, Jeff Jacques, I believe is how his last name is pronounced. I could be blowing that up. Jeff Jacques, maybe. It's he introduces what he calls Anthro PCs, which is just like computers that are person-shaped and have AI. And then as the book has gone on, it's kind of gotten more about the characters and about those AI in particular. So, I mean, they'll have discussions about indie rock, and then they'll have discussions about, you know, this character's job and what am I going to do. And then there's also some, like, are robots people kind of stuff going on.
Interesting.
And it's my favorite kind of magical realism, where it's depicted exactly as if it were the real world. There is just also this magical, in this case technological, element that is just so commonplace that nobody remarks on it anymore.
Gotcha.
One of the really cool things about that is if you go back and look at like the current strips and then look at his first strips, the difference in art is astronomical. His art has improved like 1,000-fold over the years. And I think that could be really inspiring for somebody who wants to make a webcomic, but maybe thinks, you know, I'm not a good enough artist to do my own art on a webcomic. And in his case, I mean, he started and he just kind of learned along the way. And now it's gone to some of the best art that I see in webcomics for my own personal taste. Obviously, people are going to have differing opinions, but he's kind of mastered that really clean-lined comic book sort of art style.
Yeah,
which I guess I kind of wandered away from the question, but yes, it's a serial.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a lot of my favorite, you know, webcomics that I'm try to read regularly, that I like make a conscious effort of finding every time I want to go back and read it, are serialized comics like they're serialized webcomics like this. Like there's one that I just am in love with by I want to say Ananth. I can remember the first names, Ananth and Yuko. They're fantastic. They do this series called Barbarous. And I mean, those guys, they've done a bunch of other books. Like our cats are more famous than us is like a big one that they did. They did Johnny Wander too. Yeah, Johnny Wander is their big one. And I've been reading a book on their site. If you go to like johnnywander.com, they've got a bunch of different webcomics that they write and create and produce and do a bunch of stuff with. And the one that I've been like absolutely in love with is called Barbarous. And it kind of follows that same thing that you were talking about, Brian, where like there is this magical realism to everything, and no one really comments on it because it's just commonplace. Like magic in this world of Barbarous is just kind of a thing. And so our main character, you know, she went to a magic school, but she dropped out, ? And there's like some unfolding of that, like her personal life as the story continues, and you meet like these people who are, some of them are witches and some of them are just regular folks, and it's really, really cool. Like it's a beautiful book, but it's serialized, so you get like 1 or 3 chapters a week depending on how their release schedule works, which is really, really cool. And chapters meaning like pages. But yeah, I guess the bigger question is like, do you like this format? I mean, I think Brian and I, it's probably safe to say yes, but Nick, do you think you're going to try to come back to this stuff outside of just, you know, research for this episode? And if it's no, that's totally fine. Right. I just would like to hear reasons why you don't like it.
I don't need encouragement to, you know, shit on something, Mike. I can do it. Trust me. I would say, honestly, the stuff that's going to make it the easiest for me to engage with it, I'm going to obviously try more. So with that in mind, like the Webtoon stuff, like for me, that's something I would consider, especially some of these ones like Room of Swords, ones where I can just boot up my app and my phone's going to tell me when there's a new strip, and I don't have to worry about whether I'm on my computer or whether I'm on my phone, or whether I'm going to have to, you know, have both hand, you know, be able to like hold it with one hand and pinch the screen with the other or anything like that. So yeah, the Webtoon side of things, I think definitely has more of a chance. Any of the other stuff, it's like, I just don't understand who reads it and how. It's like, why are you sitting on your computer and like reading these? Like, what's what's going on with you? You know, I don't understand that at all. But on the flip side, something like Atomic Robo, which is not a webtoon, I would possibly still consider, just because their site is actually really well configured, not unlike a webtoon in terms of how it's handled. So you are still going to a website and everything, but it is actually formatted properly. And that's one I think I would probably also resume, just because the physical trades are expensive. Mm-hmm. And even when it's on sale on Comixology, Atomic Robo, for being an indie book, still has Big Two prices attached to it. So out of wanting to save a few bucks, I might end up reading that way as well. So gotcha. Yeah, like I said, you know, the stuff that's going to make it easier for me to access, the stuff that's going to in format most likely resemble formats that I'm already used to via Comixology and things like that. Yeah, those are the things I'm going to be more likely to pick up, because you know, as much as I love JL8, it is not fun to read that way. That's for sure.
Right. Okay, that's good to hear. I'm glad that we were able to like push this on you and you didn't hate it so much. You just like, fuck all this bullshit. I can understand that, because like I know that a lot of these aren't for you know, like they aren't made for everybody, like, and not everybody's going to be into that. I know that something like Webtoons, like one of their biggest pulls is a lot of like romance comics, right? Like if you look at the Webtoons, like if you open up this app and you look at all of the offerings, like a large majority of the very popular books are either they're very similar to shonen manga, right? So they're like your Bleach or your Naruto's or whatever, where there's just like a lot of action-packed, like anime action and stuff, and you've got this male protagonist who's young and he's into this new world or whatever. But on the flip side, the actual really like the most popular stuff is romance comics, whether that's totally. Like yoi comics or yaoi, I think is how you say that, or it's just straight up like women protagonists, you know, falling in love with like a man or a woman or whoever. Those are like the real big pulls for Webtoons. And I think that's because, you know, like Webtoons offers this safe space for you to consume this book without anybody really seeing or knowing what you're reading, unless you start to comment or you make your profile public or yada, yada, yada. But you can still you can consume all that without even logging in. You know, like a lot of the books.
Right. The only difference is it's your mobile device, so you're probably doing it on a subway or a train where someone is looking over your shoulder and seeing what you're consuming.
maybe. But I'd like to, you know, I don't think that people are doing that as often as you think. But like, I mean, a lot of the books that I'm reading on Webtoon, honestly, are romance comics that I just have easy access to get into, and I can flick through, you know, a single comic and try it all out really, really quickly. The books that I'm really into on Webtoon, I will just say, are Let's Play, which is like a video game themed romance story about like a YouTuber who moves next door to this video game developer. That book I love so much.
It's like all the cheesy tropes of like a romance comic, and it hits those notes so perfectly that I'm just it's chef kiss, man. It's good.
Yeah, it's very good. I've been reading Dice, which is like this stupid shonen manga, but it's like 200 plus chapters and I can't put it down. My Giant Nerd Boyfriend, which is probably one of the biggest webtoons right now, or at least from my understanding, it's a pretty big book, and it's just about this woman who lives. I actually don't know what country she lives in. It's about her and her boyfriend just like living their life, and so it's like a true slice of life story about the two of them. It's very funny, and the art's very cutesy. And I've been reading this new book called The Devil is a Handsome Man, and I don't even know what it's about, but it is like weirdly sexy, and I can't stop reading it.
Weirdly sexy.
It's it is. It's because like it's in hell. The story takes place in hell, and the main character is the new assistant of the devil. But there's like kind of a romantic relationship between them, her, and this other guy. And I don't know. I don't even know what the book's about, really. It's just like she's the personal assistant of the devil, and everything looks so fucking cool. Like all the character design is so cool that I can't stop reading it. It's very, very good. But like Let's Play is the one is probably the book that I look the most forward to, because it's just so. I like nitpick the book as I'm reading it, but I can't stop reading the story because it's so
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like, yeah, I'm the exact
So
same
lovey.
way. I read every single update, and I'm just like, ugh, that's so dumb. People don't act like that. Like,
Yeah.
I promise that your online MMO guild is almost certainly not exclusively like thin, busty women.
Right.
And then like your ripped ass guild leader, who is like like this big gorgeous mountain of a man. It's like every human in this comic is a physical avatar of perfection.
Yeah.
Oh no.
There was like the series. I'm sorry, I'm gonna just gush about this book because I'm glad that someone else reads it. There's like the like 2 or 3 strips where the main character, I can't remember what her name is, she happens to run into every single hot guy without a shirt, like in like 2 or 3 strips, and she's constantly blushing because she's wearing like a big loose sweater and they're all like mostly naked and everyone has like 18-pack abs. And I'm just like, oh my god!
And then like
this is
somebody
so much.
spills coffee on her shirt, and then she has to change her shirt.
And then her boss takes off his shirt
to give it to her, and it's just like, oh, it's so tropey and silly, but it's so much fun.
And yeah, I can't stop reading it. Like, that happened 30 strips ago, and I'm still in it.
Yeah,
like I don't know. I find like it's a great place to try this kind of stuff that you maybe wouldn't want to, and I'm confident to admit that that's what I'm reading. But there's so much more of that. Like, one of the big pulls I think for a while at Webtoon was this book that recently got translated, or the series that recently got translated, called Fluffy Boyfriend, about like a cat that gets turned into this cute teenage boy, and some bad thing happened to his owner, and she is in love with him as a human cat boy. But he also is a cat, and he can't see her anymore. I don't even know what's going on. And I got like 20 chapters in. I was like, I was baffled. But it has so many likes and comments, like 10,000 comments per chapter. Like, and that's the really interesting thing. I realize we're like running really short on time here, so I just want to say like one quick thing that I think is really interesting about webtoons and webcomics is like this direct communication you get with creators. Like, if you go and comment on a book, there's a chance that creator may see that comment. And I know that webcomics also have this, at least some of them do, where you can just immediately interact with that. I don't know if you guys have participated in that or if you've seen it at all, but like, what are your thoughts on like, you know, the direct communication you can get with these creators on these books?
I think that it is a tool that can be used for good and for evil.
Oh, totally.
Because I think that if people are being positive and saying like, hey, I love this book, I'm so excited for it, I think that can be a really positive motivating force for a creator. Alternatively, people can be real shitty online. Like, it's what the internet is famous for.
Right.
And so it's the idea that someone could be spewing all this poison into the ears of your favorite creators and could potentially make them stop creating is infuriating and makes me think that the entire internet was a mistake.
Gotcha. Nick, what are your thoughts on like the direct communication you can get with creators on this?
Well, as someone who really likes to curl up on the couch with a box of popcorn and scroll through a YouTube comments section and just watch what happens, I'm that guy. I was kind of disappointed because it seems like really positive, or at least I when I would scroll down to the bottom on Webtoons and I read the first couple comments, it would be like, oh, I knew so-and-so would push the button, or, you know, this comic gives me life, heart, exclamation point. And I'd be like, well, that's not what I came down here for, but that's very nice that people are engaging with it and seemingly being positive. I don't know if that's because of a algorithm, or I don't remember whether or not people could like people's comments and then drive them to the top, which is probably what's happening. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, one of the weird phenomena for me when it comes to these webtoons is that I've been reading a bunch of these series where, like, this series has 200 entries, this series has 75 entries, this series has 100 entries, and so I'm, you know, taking a chunk out of these series that I'm reading, but I'm not ever getting current. So it's not like I'm entering into that phenomena of like, oh, you know, I guess I'll have to wait until next week or something like that. And which I think is a totally different thing. You know, I'm just sort of trying to binge it. And I did sort of get the feeling with some of them, and this isn't to say that this doesn't happen in comics either, but sometimes a chapter would like just move along and it really just wouldn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? It's just sort of like, here's 7 panels and it doesn't do much or whatever. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, that was okay. But when all is said and done, I just get to scroll down to the bottom and click next, and I'm on to the next one. And so this strip doesn't have to, you know, I'm not going to weigh on it for too long because I'm just on to the next one. Whereas, like, if you're current, this might have actually kind of, like, pissed me off.
Yeah, the only alternative, though, is to have a book, an update get delayed. And if you do that too many times, people will definitely stop showing up.
Yeah.
So I think that for a lot of creators, the lesser sin is to put up a filler comic than it is to not have an update.
And it does seem like, and maybe this is just the consequence of being a webcomic, or I don't know what, but I did notice with some of these webcomics and some of these webtoons, the strip length and the strip quality would actually vary quite a bit from time to time. Like, I was dealing with a couple ones where all of a sudden I would just click to the next strip and it would be like monochrome and like half the size of the normal ones, and I would be like, okay. And then you would just scroll down to the bottom and like the author would be saying something like, sorry, shorter strip this week or something like that. And so it does really make me wonder what sort of like timelines and deadlines people have, because I feel like it's a totally different ball game than it is with conventional comics. I feel like it's just a totally different system going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you think about it, there probably is like, especially with web comics, right? There's a very like, you set your own pace and schedule.
Right.
With Webtoons,
but what's weird is it's not like American indie comics, because like with most like American indie sort of stuff, or at least a lot of it, you're doing your own pacing, but eventually you're putting out your OGN or whatever it is, right? So you're still waiting for the end product. And with this market, you're sort of at your own pace, but you're also having to, you know, put out something. You know, you're not waiting until whatever it is done.
It varies from comic to comic, I think.
Sure.
You know, with Webtoons,
absolutely.
What's really interesting is I know that they do print versions of the webcomics in like Korea specifically. Like, if there's a demand, they will do print versions. But like with webcomics, you know, if you think about something like Check Please, or you think about Ojoy Sex Toy, and there's a bunch of other ones, like a lot of them do print editions, and they're just like, all right, we're going to collect strips, you know, 101 to 150 and put them all in a book. And that's a very small number, but Girls with Slingshots is a perfect example. You know, I think she put out 5 major huge volumes of that book, all said and done, like all these various strips, and people want that, like they buy it, but it's all based on, like, I don't know if that was the intended goal or if there was demand, but I think like there's a difference between a strip comic like Girls with Slingshots and a serialized comic like something like Barbarous, you know, to go back to my example from before, where there's probably going to be an end arc of like 5 or 6 quote-unquote issues, because that book is structured on a page-by-page release date schedule, but at the end of the day, they are telling things chapter by chapter that may contain 20 to 30 pages, kind of like your standard comic. It's just the release is different because they wanted to release it as a webcomic first before they actually went to some sort of print edition. And with Webtoons, you know, who knows what the release schedule contracts are, if there are any. Because, I said before, it's all about page views, and the only way to get page views is to actually push out your comic so that your consumers or the people that are subscribed to your comic get that notification, so they go and check it, and you need to get a certain number of views within that release date. And again, it all depends on the contract, I think. So, you know, pushing out a shorter strip means you're still going to get that page view, and you're not going to miss your actual payout at the end of the day.
Right. And so, again, this is me, and I'm saying this as if it wasn't already very evident. This is me knowing next to nothing about any of this, but it did make me wonder if maybe sometimes an attempt to, I guess, stay current or you know, keep up with your schedule has resulted in you know, consequences for the strip, which again, this is no different than American, quote unquote, normal American comics, or, you know, the stuff that we're used to seeing. They
Western
fall
comics,
prey to the same problems too. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I would love to have this conversation go on for another hour, but we do have to wrap up. So let's go into some credits. This is like super cool. If Brian and Nick, I'm gonna grab your suggestions from our notes, and if you guys have anything else, please let me know. I'll put it in the show notes for all you listeners out there who want to check out the books that we mentioned today. But, if you want to follow us all on Twitter, if you have any questions about webtoons or webcomics or what we liked or what we didn't like, follow us all on Twitter. You can check out Brian at BrianHead. You can check out Nick at Death Star Plans, spelled a really funky way, so just check the show notes. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where we post all sorts of stuff at all hours of the night because I don't sleep. And we post polls every Sunday, such as this week's poll, which was, who is the stretchiest? And I put some really weird answers on there because, I had to Google who was an elastic type person that wasn't Plastic Man and Reed Richards. So go check that out and vote.
We also have our Goodreads group where we post weekly threads. If you stop by this week, you'll have a chance to nominate a book for the July Book of the Month. You can also hit us up at our website, ircbpodcast.com, where we have a pronunciation guide and merch. You're going to want to hit in there as soon as you can and buy a copy of our zine.
Very limited print, by the way. Very limited print.
It'll make you feel real special.
On top of that, we always encourage our listeners, please go to iTunes and rate and subscribe to our show. I don't think anyone needs to be convinced that it does matter. It really does. Also, please email the show, ircb@destroythesybe.org. Any questions, any concerns, anything you want to just let us know how much you love or maybe don't love the show, we're all ears.
Infinity Shred does all the music for our show. They're the best band in the universe. Xander is the human version of a sunray. He also edits the show. He's just a great big ball of fun. I want to say thank you to Brian and Nick for being on the show. Thank you to you listeners out there for being awesome and giving me shit on Twitter. I really love talking to people about comic books despite how angry I sound about it. Thank you for everyone who reaches out. And until next time, I just want to say support your local library, and thank you.